Okay, guys, before we start Chapter 17, Lesson 2, we're going to do a quick review of Chapter 17, Lesson 1. The Civil War has just ended and the South surrendered. We gave the South some pretty reasonable terms for their surrender because the main goal was to take the two pieces of the country and put them back together to join the Union and the Confederacy. Abe Lincoln comes up with a plan called Reconstruction, and that plan is to rebuild the country and to rebuild the South and give them a path to rejoin. What happens? After the war is over, Lincoln takes a little bit of time to relax and he goes to see a play at Ford's Theater. A man named John Wilkes Booth, who was a Southerner, gets into the balcony, shoots Abe Lincoln, and assassinates him and kills him. After he dies, Andrew Johnson, the vice president, becomes the president. Why this is such a problem is Andrew Johnson was a Democrat and Abe Lincoln was a Republican. So they have very different ideas, and no one ever expected Andrew Johnson to actually be the president. And now he's got to continue a plan that was not his and try to fix the country. So Congress, or the government, began to put its own Reconstruction plan into place. And Reconstruction was Lincoln's plan for fixing the South after the war, repairing the damage, and allowing them to join the country again. So everything they were trying to do, President Johnson would veto. And veto is when the president denies a law from passing. So when the Reconstruction Acts were passed, a lot of laws were set up to help the freedmen or the African Americans after the war was over. They got rid of the black codes, which were laws that only applied to African Americans. And under the new law, they were allowed to own property, they were allowed to sue people, and they were allowed to marry legally. So Congress proposed the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment specifically says that the Bill of Rights covers all Americans, including whites and African Americans. It says that no state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process. And what that means is they cannot take your property or your freedom away without the law, without a trial, without things going through the proper steps. This applies to everyone in America except for the American Indians. Tennessee was the only southern state that accepted the amendment. So out of all those states you did on the map, the red states and the blue states, the Confederates, Tennessee was the only one that is going to accept the 14th Amendment. The other Confederate states rejected it, and they were not allowed to officially rejoin the country. So a new group was created called the Freedmen's Bureau. Congress started the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865, and it was set up to help the former slaves and the Southerners after the war. One of the programs the Freedmen's Bureau did was to set up hospitals because a lot of the people after the war was over had horrific damage and they needed help to get back into shape to work again and to even live again. So the Freedmen's Bureau was set up to help the former slaves, to help them after the war was over, and initially it just set up hospitals, but then it was extended or enlarged to give shelter until the freedmen could find jobs. And a lot of them would have a hard time finding jobs. They were slaves before, and now they're free in the South, but the South does not want to treat them fairly. A lot of them are going to struggle to find something to do, some place to work. It also gave the children of freedmen a chance to go to school. The Freedmen's Bureau tried to help protect the civil rights of African Americans. And civil rights means basic human rights. Okay, so Andrew Johnson is similar to President Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is actually his hero. And if you guys remember, in the last lesson, Andrew Jackson took most of the land away from the Indians with the Trail of Tears, and Andrew Johnson is going to continue to do the same type of thing. In the 1830s, the United States government removed a whole bunch of Native Americans from their land. When the Civil War began, a lot of the Native American tribes sided with the Confederacy. And since the Confederacy lost, the Native Americans were going to be further punished. They had to sign a treaty in 1866, and these treaties forced them to give up even more of their homelands. They also were required to let a railroad be built through their land. The federal government used the western half of this territory to resettle the Indians into other areas, which basically means we made them move to land where we wanted them to live. The Native Americans were moved onto chunks of lands called reservations, which means land that was saved for them, but in all reality, the land that was saved for them was not the best land. And we were forcing people into towns and villages, and a lot of times these people did not get along to begin with, and then we're forcing them to live in close quarters with each other. So when he does this, this is known as the Second Great Removal. In March 1867, Congress passes the first of 4 Reconstruction Acts, and Andrew Johnson vetoes it. And what happens when he vetoes it? Congress gets a chance to override. They have to vote again, and now instead of only being able to pass by 1 vote, the vote has to pass by 2/3, and they're able to successfully override the president's veto. The first part of the Reconstruction Act says that the 10 states that had not returned to the Union, the Confederate states, would be put under military rule. The South would then be divided into 5 sections the government would supervise. In order to be readmitted to the country, they would have to have brand new elections, and they would have to allow white and black men to vote. And in those elections, they would have to elect a mixture of white and black men to run the government as well. For the states to be allowed to rejoin the Union, they had to accept the 14th Amendment, they had to write their own new state constitution, and those constitutions had to be approved by the U.S. government. So by 1870, all 10 of the states were finally able to rejoin the Union. So the country's going to be whole again. So what happens next is Congress is getting really frustrated with Andrew Johnson. Every time they pass something, he vetoes it. When they're trying to make things better or solve a problem, he is saying no. And they cannot get along. So what Congress tries to do is they try to impeach him. So every time they pass a bill, every time the Republicans pass one, Johnson vetoes it, and Congress overrides his veto almost every time. So they start to get really frustrated with him, and they basically set a trap for him. They pass a law called the Tenure of Office Act. And this act tells the president that he cannot fire anybody without their permission. So if somebody tells you you can't do something, what's the first thing you want to do? You want to do the thing they told you not to. So what happens? They tell the president, you can't fire anybody. He vetoes that law. They pass it again. So what he does, they tell the president he can't fire somebody. He basically says, watch me. He fires one of his cabinet members without their permission. He fires this man, Edwin Stanton, for disagreeing with him. So the Senate becomes furious. They say, we need to impeach the president. He broke the law. So they decide to charge the president with misconduct, which basically means acting inappropriately. So when an impeachment happens, there's 2 steps. They have to go through the House of Representatives, and they have to vote to impeach him, and then the Senate has to vote to remove him from office. The House of Representatives actually votes, and they get enough votes to kick the president out. So now the Senate has to decide. The Senate basically has a trial. And what happens is they are one vote short of removing the president. After this time, President Andrew Johnson really struggles to get anything else done. He's not going to want to cooperate with Congress anymore. And if someone tries to get you fired, you're not going to want to work with that person anymore. And that's how the president and Congress both felt. So in 1868, the next election is coming up. Andrew Johnson is definitely not going to be popular enough to win. They tried to remove him the last time, so he's not going to run again. The Republicans choose Ulysses Grant. And if you guys remember, he was a war hero during the Civil War. He fought to help free the slaves. He did not have very much political experience, but he was very popular for what he did during the war. The Democrats chose a guy named Horatio Seymour. He was the governor of New York. A lot of people felt that Grant had saved the United States, and now he would save the country. So Grant wins the election. It's a close vote, but one of the big things that helps Grant win is this is the first time African Americans can vote. And since he fought on the side that freed many of these African Americans, almost 500,000 of them vote for Ulysses Grant. If you guys have any suggestions on how I could do this better, what would be better for you to learn, or if you have any questions, you can email me at the address. I'll post it up at the end of the video, or you can call the school and they'll put you in contact with me. Stay healthy. Hopefully I see you guys soon.